In F. Scott Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby, we find ourselves in the vibrant era of the Roaring Twenties, characterized by post-war prosperity and a fervor for material wealth. The story unfolds in two fictional Long Island towns, West Egg and East Egg, homes to the affluent elite. At the story's core is Jay Gatsby, a self-made millionaire renowned for his lavish parties and an air of mystery. Gatsby's tale revolves around his unwavering love for Daisy Buchanan, a woman who symbolizes his distorted vision of the American dream, a woman whom he lost to another man, Tom Buchanan, while he served in the military abroad during World War One. Basically, The Great Gatsby explores a lot of themes within the novel. It's why this book has been studied for so long, even 100 years later, right?
Yeah.
And one of the themes, the core themes, is actually a question that many of us have probably asked ourselves before: is money the answer to every single problem in the world?
Yeah, I think that's why it has been such a timeless piece as well. Because if we look back also at the etymology, at the history of Fitzgerald's contemporaries as well, right? In addition to The Great Gatsby, The Great
Yeah.
Gatsby was one of the first novels to actually cover this idea of money, of the
Yeah.
American dream,
Yes,
of how money is used to be so powerful, and then
quite
the
prevalent
truth
at the
is-
time.
Yeah,
Yeah, right. Yeah,
yeah. And so this really abolished the notion. This really brought to light, not necessarily abolished, but brought to light the truth of money, the nuances of the matter. And I think this was one of the first ones. And
Yes.
if we look back further, if we look a few years after the novel, we see other authors also beginning to write about this
problem,
idea, right? This problem,
question,
right?
Yeah.
We have Steinbeck's. Steinbeck?
Steinbeck. Yeah, it
Yeah,
was Steinbeck.
Steinbeck's. We got Steinbeck writing about the American dream similarly in Mice and Men. We have Hemingway writing about similar themes in The Old Man and the Sea. Yeah.
Yeah.
And we have playwrights talking about, for example, in The Death of the Salesman.
Yes.
Right?
Arthur Miller.
Arthur Miller.
Oh yeah, that's classic. And
that's a classic. Yeah.
right.
And yeah.
And yeah. So and hold on. You know, all those were written after a war, right? After a significant event. I remember 1950s Arthur Miller wrote it after the Second World War. Great Gatsby written after the first.
Yeah.
So is there any correlation actually between those?
The thing is, after war times, there tends to be a stronger economic boom because the devastations of the war creates opportunities for jobs for lots of areas of growth, which leads to rapidly booming economies. So lots of money can be made in that.
Yeah.
And so thereby it leads to more periods of growth of prosperity.
Yeah.
And
yes.
Yeah, and people begin to have more money and they develop a stronger idea of how money can solve their problems.
Yeah. And this led to the American capitalism, this whole idea nowadays, this whole capitalist identity of America, and this was actually very prominent back in the 1920s. It wasn't called, I don't think capitalism existed, I mean, as a concept back in the time, in the 1920s. Not sure if that capitalism was developed that back, I think. But that essentially was the idea of capitalism.
That was the idea, yeah.
The American dream. So, okay.
Yeah, and all of these authors talking about the same thing, you know something is up, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. And so Fitzgerald in particular, among all the other authors trying to explore the American dream, basically highlights that the question, is money the answer to every single problem, is no, it is not.
It isn't, yeah.
It isn't.
And we see it vividly through Gatsby's tragic downfall.
Yeah. And yeah, so The Great Gatsby, right? One of them, probably the biggest theme in the novel, is the American dream.
Yeah.
This American dream is the notion that if you work hard enough, you'll get rewarded with money, with wealth, with all sorts of rewards, right? And basically, The Great Gatsby says no. Even if you work hard, the American dream isn't what you expect it to be.
Yeah. Because if you look at the theme itself, it's fundamentally impossible with human nature, right?
Okay, so the
For
American
example,
dream um, doesn't have to be. It doesn't necessarily have to be wealth for everyone. It has different meanings for every single
different
person.
connotations, yeah.
Yeah, and for Gatsby, who already is very rich, very like beyond probably considered a millionaire or even a billionaire nowadays. He's like a magnate, right? And so his American dream isn't necessarily about wealth, but about love. And unfortunately for him, that doesn't turn out the way he wanted to,
Yeah.
right?
Mm. Yeah, and this really ties into his obsession with the past as well, which he sought to solve with money, right? And then we learned that that necessarily isn't the case
Yeah,
because,
because you can't solve all your problems with money,
yeah,
right?
it's just against human nature because humans cannot be reduced to just materialistic creatures,
Mm-hmm.
right?
And what Gatsby did was he bought a whole mansion beside his old girlfriend that he wanted to reconcile with.
Yeah, so he was pretty much just like saying to Daisy across the dock, "I have more money than your husband. Come to me," right?
Yeah. And guess
And
what? It didn't work.
it's a very reductionist standpoint, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. And he hosts all these lavish parties in this huge mansion, hoping that one day Daisy would drop by
yeah,
and right and see all this glory that he has. But no, it doesn't work in the end.
mm,
And this really shows that um, the American dream is futile. It is not attainable for many. It is for some, but cannot be said that it is an attainable dream for every person, I think. And
yeah,
so even Americans today, I'm sure some of them still believe in the whole idea of the American dream is
yeah.
that if you work hard, right,
I
you'll
think
get rewarded.
humans have a tendency to glorify the successes of the few and then overlook the failures
Yeah,
of the majority of
of the
people.
majority.
Yeah,
So yeah, and even politicians today. We're not going to go to politics today, but but even
yeah,
politicians today have said, "Oh, we're gonna make the American dream real again."
yeah,
Even right. So even politicians today, right?
yeah.
Many prominent American politicians. I think. I don't know. Should we say names?
Sure,
Yeah,
go for it.
sure. Like Vivek Ramaswamy, right? He said, "Oh, we're gonna make American dream real again. We're gonna make it possible for Americans if you elect me president." Well, there's a lot. There has been a lot of candidates who have said that, and that's what they promised. We're gonna make
Yeah.
the American
The
dream
thing is,
real
yeah,
again.
this thing really
Right.
resonates with the American people because that was one of the promises that millions of immigrants throughout its like three
Yes,
centuries of existence
it's the
came to
land of
America.
opportunity.
A promise, yeah.
Yes.
That's what was promised by this land, and so that was like the central focus of this land, and it was embedded in their blood, right? This kind of
Yes.
belief. And it's really not true. I think there was this one book that said that to examine the success of a person, you don't look at the person itself, but where they come from, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that really ties into this kind of overarching theme, right?
Yes. Yes. Okay, so Jay Gatsby, right? His dream of reconciling with his lost love, his past love, Daisy, didn't work. It was superficial at best, but it didn't really go as he planned, and it was more hollow than he expected it to be because of his inability to move away from the past. He's too fixated on the fact that because we have relationships before, right, in the past, we were um, we were in a relationship, and now we're not.
Yeah,
He's still fixated on the fact that 5 years ago he was still there, but now it's different, and he cannot bring himself to accept that fact.
yeah. And I think another thing he did, which led to his failure in getting her back, was that he kind of glorified her because how people tend to like look past the flaws of people after they lose them, right? That's
Yes.
why we think of the dead as more glorious than they sometimes are, right? Never speak of the dead, as they say, right?
Hmm. That's a fair point. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think after he lost Daisy, he kind of forgot about the ways Daisy wasn't as perfect as he later thought she was, which we really see it later as well as a reader, right? Because when we see that Gatsby passes away, Gatsby and who kind of just left for vacation, doesn't really give a
Doesn't
give a crap about. Yeah. So it's really like they are in many cases not good people to be acquainted with, right?
Yeah.
They're very emotionally barren, they are very hedonistic, and they are very materialistic.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. And that's why Jay Gatsby was so fixated on the fact that 5 years ago.
5 years ago, 5 years ago. It was this long time ago.
Yeah.
Like he doesn't really recognize how much has happened since then. And people change. People maybe Daisy wasn't as bad as she later proved out to be when he was first acquainted with her, but people change.
Yes. And that, I mean, I think that's a bit of human nature, right? It's our nature to just think about the past and think, because that happened, it should happen the same way.
Yeah, and I think that another thing Gatsby did was his inability to recognize that he can never go back to it no matter what. Because in the mind, right, so much time has passed, you learn too much, you go back to it.
Yes.
Right? And so can we argue that was what Fitzgerald was getting at? Yeah.
Yeah, that's Fitzgerald's message, I think.
Yeah. And I think, So for this exact topic, we interviewed an educator who had taught The Great Gatsby at the IB or NDP level for years to provide her understanding and opinions on it.
In life is trying to go back to a time and place where you thought you were happier. It's gone. And you learn and you too much to ever go back to that place. So could one argue that that's part of this unattainable dream? Gatsby wants to go back 5 years and reclaim that moment in time and place that he had with Daisy, but he can't. It's way too much has happened now. Would that be a fair statement to make?
Yeah, I can see the point where you're coming from, because before they were like in a happy relationship, right? Before the war and all that. And now it's different, but he's still looking at it from the past.
Yeah, exactly. And what happens is Daisy has moved on, but Gatsby has not. And so they may have been close at one time, but the gap has widened because he's not been able to move on from that first true love he had. Okay, so that's something that ties into that as well.
Yeah, I think through this novel, Fitzgerald was particularly potent in providing the idea that really with time, you can never go back to a certain place in time after that time passes.
Yeah, so you can't really look back on the past.
Yeah, we learn too much. We just learn too much.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But even though the majority of us know that, we still try to glorify and we endeavor to go back to it. No matter how unrealistic it is, we still do it.
We still do it. And even after 100 years,
nature.
we still do it.
Stubborn and ceaseless, right?
Yeah. With that being said, thank you guys for tuning in on our first episode of Beneath the Pages. If there's one thing that we want you to leave with this video, it's the fact that the pursuit of things like materialism, of wealth, of greed, and all these things, they won't exactly lead to happiness and fulfillment, the true fulfillment. And that is the message of The Great Gatsby. So, in that case,
thank you for joining us in this first
episode, and we will be sure to have lots more more analysis of different works.
In subsequent episodes we'll cover many other authors who are renowned throughout history, many of whom are actually Fitzgerald's contemporaries.
And with that being said, we'll leave off with the last quote of this book.
So we beat on, both against the current, borne back ceaselessly into the past.